Good evening. Today is Tuesday, September 4th, 2018, and we're here for the Cabarrus County Board of Education work session. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'll take a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. So Dr. Kirk and Mr. Walter made the motion and the second. Any discussion?
Yes, ma'am. I asked about a week ago, I guess, to put an item on the agenda. I think it was to talk about the elimination of some enrichment programs through the PTO and the PTAs. If we could add that to the agenda, that'd be great. Just quick discussion.
Well, I will say ahead of time, it was discussed with Mr. Shaw, and the outcome was that we would refer it to the policy committee because there are likely other groups who may be interested in the same features that were being offered, and we have to make sure we're covered across the board with policy updates. So would that be acceptable?
Yes, that'd be fine, but I'd also like to maybe discuss it as a board, just to kind of clarify the situation. There was a lot of discussion on email, and I know that's probably not the best forum to discuss things. So maybe just a quick discussion at the end.
If the board would agree. So there is in form of a motion to amend the agenda, Mr. Powell?
Yes, ma'am.
Would anyone like to second that motion to amend the agenda to include a discussion of enrichment programs? I'll give him a second. Okay. Okay, Mr. Walter seconded. Okay, so we'll take any discussion on the amendment.
Could it go below 4.06, I think? Wait a minute.
Okay, let's take a motion of
5.01
first.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. Powell, is this, the end game is to then give the policy committee some structured direction? I'm not sure what the end game, open-ended discussion, I get that, but what's the desired outcome of the discussion?
Well, I just would like to know that the board is comfortable with the process that was followed, which I'm not real sure of myself. And there was a lot of emailing back and forth, but maybe if we just had a quick discussion about that and kind of figure out the process that was followed as to what happened just before the opening of school, and then we can make a decision at that point.
Okay. We'll take a motion on the amended agenda, adding an item to discuss the facilities use regarding enrichment programs. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, can you raise your hands? Say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. I'm going to vote against it just because I've had the privilege of speaking to the attorney already and know a bit about that legal guidance. So the agenda is amended, including an item after 5.01 to discuss facilities use. Okay, so we'll go on now to reports 3.01.
Yes, at this point, I just wanted to explain something that we're planning on adding, make sure everybody was aware, and trying to answer questions on actually two things that we were going to add. So I guess we're always in the process of trying to figure out how to better communicate with the board, how to get the board better information, prepare the board better. And one of the things that we actually talked about with the group of the large superintendents, the 12 largest superintendent group, which we meet once a quarter, was the idea of a quarterly forecast. So we're trying to put in front of the board, here's the things that we are anticipating being on the board agenda for the next quarter. So obviously now we couldn't do that for first quarter since we were putting in, but now in September where we would say, here's what's on for October, here's what's on for November, here's what's on for December, and then in December we would do the same thing where I would try to give you January, February, and March. Again, just in case that you have something out there that you have a question about or you're anticipating hey, when are we going to hear the Title I plan? Well, hopefully we'll give you that months ahead of time to say, hey, this is usually done in May or whenever it would come. And so what we did was have Mindy go in and pull all of the past year, so October, November, and December, to see what was on the schedule. Some of that is specific to that year. Some of it's not, so we eliminated the stuff that was specific to the last year or so and tried to go ahead and put in what we know is going to be on the agenda for October, November, December, especially if you guys were anticipating something or thought that something would be there. So again, we'll just try to implement this and make this part of the business each quarter to give you more information. If you would, I just passed out a piece of paper to all the board members, which is the quarterly forecast. Wanted to make sure you understood what that was and answer your questions about it. It doesn't mean that every single thing we'll be able to give you that, because there are times when things pop up in November that we weren't anticipating and we'll add to the agenda. But it is things that we know right now we're going to be on. I think there may have been a request from a board member about a presentation with Empower grant, so that was something we discussed and said, okay, we'll do that in October. So again, knowing when those requests are, we'll try to give them to you in the quarterly forecast. So if you would just kind of look at, I guess, one, if you have any questions about that process or what we're trying to accomplish, or anything with the quarterly forecast, and then two, to look at the sheet that I gave you to see, do you have any questions about that? Is there anything that we can answer? Is there something that you remembered that we did in November that's not on here, or something like that that we would try to answer or present? Because sometimes, we give it to you, we send it to you in an email. Sometimes it's done as a board presentation. These are all the things that we anticipate being, board activity over the next quarter. So if you'll take a look at that, and if you have any questions about the process or the forecast in front of you, I'll certainly, or we'll all try to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lowder. And I failed to recognize our school resource officer who is here. I'm not sure. Deputy Burgess is joining us this evening from Harris Red Middle School. Thank you for being here, sir. Okay, so move on to item 4.
When do you want us to ask the questions about the quarterly forecast?
Oh, you can ask now.
Is that appropriate? Years ago, we used to have a district-wide academic report that was given in October, I believe. And I think I requested it last December because it didn't happen until, it didn't happen at that point. And I think it was put in the work session in January, I guess the board retreat. It was moved to the January board retreat. And I would like for that to maybe be moved back up, to put back in October would be my preference, but October or November, to have just a district-wide academic report as a board presentation.
So I'm not sure if there's a question. I guess that Mr. Powell's asking if we can do that. So I know when he first brought that up, we tried to go back and look at that and didn't really have an academic report, so we weren't exactly sure what he was talking about. But I know that we have tried to, with the board chair for the last couple of years, because the one was to begin with the strategic plan whenever we started, and two, because there is so much academic information with the report card, we tried to do that as half of the day for the retreat, so you had enough time to kind of process it, because there's quite a bit of information. The other issue with that is the pieces of that data come out at different times, and so what we tried to do was put that date when all the data would actually be in and be able to report that. So for example, this year, and Mr. Fail can correct me or give me a high sign if you're right, last year I think the academic data was certified at the September school board, state school board meeting. This year it will not be certified until the October state school board meeting. So we've even had a question from another board member, I think, to say, hey, can we kind of know exactly when this comes? Well, we don't know when it comes, right? It changes. And so sometimes the green book information, which is the information that compares scale scores, sometimes that's available in January, sometimes it's available in February. So all of this data release is a bit of a mystery sometimes, depending on the year, and sometimes depending on the test, if there was they were testing out a test sometimes. So again, we can, I guess what that report entails is what's important there. So I don't know if that would be a larger discussion of what all would be involved. Our recommendation, I think, would still be to do that in January, because we'll have all the information. We'll have proficiency data, we'll have growth data, we'll have the graduation rate. I think some board members have asked for suspension and kind of discipline data. That report usually comes out at the first of the year. So the intent was to say, this is the time when we actually have it all. But again, I guess that's up to the board. We would still need to know what is it that, you want included in that report.
Yeah, I think it seemed to work well that it's at the retreat, so we can have a more lengthy discussion, as opposed to push it into a meeting, when we're all watching the clock and whatnot, and we have recognitions and whatnot on the business meetings. And so I guess I'd like to say it seems like the retreat is the good timing, when most of the data is available. So we will still get it. It's just a matter of when. So, others? Leave it on the retreat? Okay, general consensus? Okay, so we'll still get it. It'll just be on the retreat. And I see there's a couple other updates here, like the school performance recognition. So there will be other opportunities to hear pieces.
I think last year that was a board request to how we were going to do that recognition. Remember, we went through that process, so we tried to make sure that was available in November, because we won't have state board certified information until October. So I think November is as early as we could do that, but at least list the information. And I think principals were involved in recognizing their school, but there's a process for that we have, and that was why we added it there.
Okay.
All right, if there are no other questions, though, there's one other item here that also, again, trying to kind of increase communication, was to, one committee that we do not have in Cabarrus County Schools is a curriculum committee, a committee that kind of reviews material, that has people from all grade levels, and obviously Dr. Hill would be in charge of that. So we wanted to add that as one of the committees that we have, and kind of work with to take some information to, and I guess it would serve lots of purposes, bounce some information off of. So Dr. Hill has readily agreed that she would lead that group and start working with it. We would like to have board representation on that. So I'll let Dr. Hill just talk a little bit about that, but we didn't want to begin any of that process until we, one, had explained it to you guys, and then see if there were board members who wanted to be a part of that.
Thank you, Dr. Lowder. So yes, Dr. Lowder brought this idea to me in July, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to pull a group of stakeholders together to work through some things that we face in the curriculum and instruction department. So the committee will begin meeting in October, and it will be the first Monday of every month, right before this meeting. We plan to have a variety of stakeholders. We will have 3 teachers, so we've randomly selected an elementary, middle, and high school teacher of the year to serve on that committee. We will also have 3 leveled administrators, school-based administrators, and all 5 of our CNI directors will be on the committee, so elementary, high school, middle school, EC, and also CTE, myself, and then we would love the opportunity to have 1 to 2 board members if you would like to participate as well. So we plan to meet on the first Monday of every month, like I said. We do not want to pull teachers and staff out of the school day, so the committee will meet from 4:30 to 5:30 right before this business meeting. Excuse me, this work session.
Okay, board members, if you want to think about that. Ooh, is that just out maybe? And let me know if of your interest.
So is this a board committee, or is this designated as a board committee, or is it something
Well, I
else?
think from the standpoint of who is attending, so we just don't have a collection of folks, and it becomes another board meeting, so.
You put me down. I'm
Yes.
interested.
Okay.
I'll go. I mean, somebody else. 'Cause I know
Anyone else with interest? So you want to do Carolyn? So we'll say Benson Carolyn.
name and scope of this committee again, please?
Sure, we're just calling it the Curriculum and Instruction Committee, and we will be looking at multiple things. For example, the new ESSA legislation and how that impacts our work. We'll be taking a look at any resources that we're using, the process that we go through to continue using something or stop using something. Just anything that faces teaching and learning.
Is any kind of parent involvement, I know it would be useful, but in terms of the detail and the complexity of the federal regulations and all the stuff that y'all know, would some kind of parental involvement in the committee be appropriate?
That's a great question.
Open-ended question.
Sure, sure. I was going to say that's a great question, and I'm certainly open to that. One of the things that we already have in place is the Superintendent's Advisory Council, and so when Dr. Lowder meets with those parents quarterly, several times curriculum and instruction will present to those groups. So we thought that that would be a good opportunity to definitely loop a larger group of parents in instead of having them on this level of committee, but I'm certainly open to that as well.
Okay, and I guess, Dr. Hill, if you send out a meeting notice, please include Mr. Powell and Ms. Carpenter. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so if you all think of anything else for the quarterly forecast, let Carolyn and I know, please, and we'll assemble any other suggestions and provide them to Dr. Lowder. Okay, so next we have item 4.01, the policies for approval on the first reading. We'll welcome Ms. Reimer and Ms. Burns. And I'm just going to ask if we can go in the order, I'll say for discussion that they're in the agenda posted, just open the attachments just so we're not going back and forth like crazy. Open them.
Good evening, thank you. Madam Chair, I would also suggest, instead of me reading all these out, as I do typically, since there is going to be some discussion, I'll read one, and if you want to discuss, then I can read the next, versus reading them all and then going back all through them all over again, okay? So the first one is 1710, 4021, 7230, Prohibition Against Discrimination, Harassment, and Bullying. It's a PLS update revision, and so thoughts, questions, concerns?
Board members, any immediate questions? And I sent mine in last night, so they were answered today, fortunately.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments on 17, 10, 40, 21, 72, 30? Okay. No questions? Can this go on consent agenda? Consent? I see a thumbs up. Okay, so 1720.
1720, 4015, 7225, Discrimination, Harassment, Bullying, and Complaint Procedures. Again, a PLS update revision.
Any questions or comments? It does help to have the red changes in there to catch ourselves and know what to focus on. Okay, so consent on the second item, 1720, 4015, 7225. Okay, the next, oh, good. Ms. Reimer?
Yes, it's fine. You could probably take that. It's 4115, Behavior Standards for Transfer Students. This is a district revision to some light language dealing with behavioral expectations. We changed repeated or serious violations of the Student Code of Conduct and changed the word will to may.
Okay. And I did have a question on page 2, letter B, number 3C. So, Mr. Shaw, that states that the 8 absences in a course during each 90-day session are considered excessive. Because we don't always have a calendar structured that's a perfect 90 on each one. Would it be practical to change that to be each semester under block scheduling or something to the effect?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Probably easier to administer that way.
Well, that's why I just didn't want to get into any bantering if we happen to have a 93-day semester and said, well, those 3 days are free, I can miss school. Well, not exactly. So, board, are you okay with that at the high school level? More than 8 absences in a course during each semester are considered excessive? Okay. And then can it go on consent with just that one time frame change? Carolyn, you okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
because that was our discussion, We wanted to have something. Oh, wait a minute, is that the,
It's on page 2,
did we do something?
at the bottom there, that letter C.
What did we, oh, excuse me. Did we do anything with tardies, or that's nothing to do with tardies?
Yes, it's added in there in the red on page 2 of 3.
2 or 3?
In the first sentence of 3, excessive absences or tardies.
Or tardy, okay. I knew we talked about that, we wanted to make sure we had tardies in there, so.
Okay, so 4115 will be on consent with that one change of 90 days to semester,
Okay.
okay?
Okay, so 4150, school assignment, transfer, and program choice enrollment. That was to align with the policy of 4115. Again, a district revision to it. Very minor changes.
Any discussion on 4150?
4150 on board docs is not redlined. Am I missing something? Just, I scrolled too quickly.
And C was deleted.
It was just deleted.
Many thanks, thank you. Back me
Okay,
up, dude.
So I take 4150 can go to consent? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker, that thumbs up helps. And Mr. Harrison has done that a few times.
Absolutely.
50, oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead on you.
Okay, no, you're good. 5015 is school volunteers. That was a request by the Board of Education to have the policy committee take a look at that and some changes.
So I think that's a valuable addition. So any comments on 5015? Consent agenda?
Now, why did they change 15? 50?
It was just to say basically you can't be a volunteer and campaign during your volunteer experience. I think that's the gist of it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
That we don't have people who are coming in just to kind of campaign under the guise of volunteering, so. Okay. So you can still go in, you just can't wear your Carolyn Carpenter campaign outfit.
You're saying anytime they can't come in and wear their,
Yeah, no, it's just saying, if you're coming in to volunteer, you're not going to wear buttons and a T-shirt and those sorts of things that are campaigning.
It actually just refers to policy 77. The other policy.
Yeah. 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 To be synchronized.
I don't think well, one of the things, all these, I want to make sure they are not put on consent. Any of these policies we're getting ready to discuss.
Okay, 5015 is okay, though, because it's just referring to the other policy. Right. So you're saying the
The
last three.
So-
All of these were ones that we requested. I think all of these should be put on, because these are all ones we requested, and they're all tied in together.
This was a board requested? Who requested it?
Yes, I actually requested that the policy committee look at it. I didn't make any changes, obviously, I'm not on the committee. Because as, I'll say, social media and things evolve, and people get different ideas on campaigning. We need to ensure we maintain the educational environment of the schools. Okay, so 5015 is only a reference to the other policy, so that one is okay with consent. Is that what we're hearing?
No, I think we ordered all, and I'm just saying.
5015 also?
Well, it was one of the ones, I mean, you changed it to do the other ones, but that's just my suggestion. I'm saying it ties with the other ones.
Okay, so we'll make that one action also? Okay. So you ready to go on to the next one?
5210, distribution and display of non-curricular materials to students. Again, that was the Board of Education revision request, and the policy committee looked at that.
So we actually changed the title of that one to eliminate two.
Yeah, can you go into the details of what these recommended changes are, please?
On ours too.
Yes. So this would be something that we ask our attorneys to look at, so I'll defer to Mr. Shaw to respond to that.
Sure. On the title, I think as we read we were asked to look at the various political campaign policies. And I will say they're tricky, a lot of substance to it. On the other hand, we have an election coming up in November. So we thought it was important, if we're going to look at it, we should get something on the policy committee agenda for September so we could discuss it, but still let board members have ample opportunity to weigh in. But we didn't want to get it to the committee in October for action in November, the little late. So I think the committee is very open to any concerns or thoughts or suggestions that the board might have, either tonight or by email to Sue or Lynn or me or Cindy, anybody. We want to get the policies in a way that's comfortable to the board. We just wanted to get moving on it since we had an election coming up in November. On 5210, as we looked at it, it did not seem to be solely limited to students. And many other school districts that have a 5210 policy distribution of non-school material do not limit it to students. That's just their policy regarding distribution of materials on school grounds. So we suggested taking out to students. And then on number 8, approval of materials, we added the category of distribution materials not promote, oppose, or endorse any political party, candidate, or political issue. The board has a lot of discretion as to what topics it allows on campus. Once it allows a topic, it has to be even-handed. You can't discriminate one way or the other. We call it viewpoint neutrality. The board could say, we're not going to have political speech on materials. Or the board could say, we'll allow it. But once it's allowed, it's got to be open for everybody on equal terms. So that's a board call. We put it in here as our suggestion, but it's not a legal requirement. The thing to remember is that if you do allow it, you allow it for everybody.
So did you take this wording from another district, or you just made it, you created it?
It's pretty standard language. I'm not certain we copied it from another policy, but it's language I've seen in substance many places. Number 8, number 3F was just clarifying, I guess, an issue that arose about painting on school property and whether somebody could do that on a temporary basis or not. And our thought was to not, if whatever might be approved for distribution is one thing, but that would not include any modification of school property. So that's what 3F would be. And then G, 3G, dealt with use of employee mailboxes and email. And so we were basically saying that the those media or methods of communication will not be used for political materials. Of course, on election days, there is clear allowance of those. G, again, that is not required. The board can allow political materials to go through, but if you do it for one, you have to do it for everybody. That's the thing, and there's always the possibility that people will mistakenly infer endorsement. Anytime school materials are used, somebody might think, well, the school is endorsing this candidate because the materials are distributed. Then we just have to explain, no, if it's allowed to everybody. And the mere fact that one candidate uses it does not mean or imply any endorsement. It's open to everybody. So those are for kind of removing of political speech through these media. They're not legally required. That was our suggestion. We see in a lot of places, but it's not a strong legal objection. It's just that once you do it, you make sure you do it equally for everybody.
And can I know this is a board decision. I just want to kind of reiterate one part of that. So I don't know if you guys remember, but in the last election when President Trump was elected, we actually had someone at Hickory Ridge Middle School that painted their rock and put all kinds of, blah, blah, President Trump or Donald Trump. And then that actually made national news because we had parents that were complaining to basically say the school has endorsed President Trump, right, which obviously wasn't the case, and they painted over it. So not that, I guess we'd just say, one, that's not hypothetical. We just dealt with that a couple years ago. So I would just say, please, what I think the policy committee said and what we would ask you to do is to try to create a policy that is the least disruptive to students at school. So a principal who I think has a very difficult job adds to their job when now we're on national news if it's something that's permitted. So whatever you guys decide, and again, this is a board decision, we understand that it's your decision to make, but to please try to make that as least disruptive as possible, because people coming on the campus or providing parts of campus for campaign just has the potential to be very disruptive, and as we've already seen, actually have national media involved.
So this wording, as it is right now, is distinct from student attire or dress code prohibitions. We can all name all sorts of hats or T-shirts or whatever comes to mind that can be disruptive. This policy does not address or preclude a student wearing a hat or a T-shirt or something else that has those sometimes those reactions. This is bringing politics on the campus, but it's previously in its first run was material address. The title was materials to students.
To students.
But we're not talking here about a student's physical attire.
That's not. I didn't read the
dress code in any kind. Well, the display of political themes is kind of covered here.
Yeah, this talks about bringing materials.
All right.
It didn't really address clothing. Now that's an interesting issue.
So then, somewhat overlaps to display.
It can.
A phrase.
Excuse me, that's kind of because we basically in policy, because we talked about buttons also, because again, that kind of gets in that gray area also, because a perfect example of when you go into the Board of Elections, anytime, if say during the when you have early voting, if you go into the Board of Elections, say you need to get numbers or something, and you've got buttons or you've got, some of your campaign things, you've got to leave everything outside there. You got to take that button off. If you've got a shirt on that's got your name or something off of it, you got to take everything off before you, I don't care what it is, or cover it in some shape or form. And if you've got a little thing that says your name on it and everything, it better be off of you. That's just like wearing one of your campaign, signs.
Yeah.
So what's the difference of that than you going in our school because you got one of your campaign signs on your shirt? So what is the difference with that? Because most of the campaign buttons look just like a campaign sign. So when you're coming in our school building, you got a campaign sign on your shirt. So are we not going to address that?
Yeah. And let me just follow up while I'm on the topic with Mr. Harrison. A student's ability to wear clothing is going to be governed by the Constitution much more than this. Separate policy, and the general rule is student has free speech unless it becomes disruptive or becomes lewd, or there are certain categories. There have been cases across the country where somebody makes a political statement and that's considered disruptive, but in my view, that's a pretty high standard. I think students generally can wear campaign shirts or whatever, and people don't like it, that's speech. I wouldn't consider that disruptive unless in an unusual circumstance. In my view, this isn't designed to restrict or limit what students can wear during the school day. And we could speculate as to what about if a student had a sign? I don't know if we have a policy on that. What if an outsider has a sign? I think this addresses the outsider cannot come in with political materials.
I'm a little confused on the scope, because the scope says this policy only applies to non-school groups, right? Under number 1, only the following non-school agencies and organizations are permitted to distribute or display non-school materials on Cabarrus County properties, and it goes on to say what that is. I mean, everything else seems to be prohibited, so. And it talks about the standards of approving those materials from these groups. It says all materials from the groups above shall be approved. And then it talks about how that's going to be distributed. So I'm a little confused on what is the scope here. What are we limiting? Candidates individually? Because that doesn't seem to, I'm just a little confused there.
We also have candidates that are employees too, I guess, as well from time to time. But I think I'm fine with the discussion and kind of hashing this out, but I think the timing of it is kind of poor. If we want to discuss this in March, April, May, June, and to kind of take our time and get through it, that's fine. But to just kind of rush through and change a policy that has, I don't know, 4 or 5 parts to the change, I think maybe we could do this maybe start it in January and work through it at that time.
And that follows up on the comment I'd mentioned earlier. There are a lot of ways to go and a lot of moving parts on these policies, and it's difficult to start it in September for an election. The question is, are there some things that we think should be tightened up that we can pretty much agree on in advance, of the November election? If there are some of those, then that'd be a good thing to address, either something that's non-controversial or something that is considered, there might be a serious problem.
I mean, the issue that Dr. Lowder brought up, is that covered in another policy, or does it have to be in here, in this one?
And that would be, again, which issue, Mr. Walter?
I think Dr. Lowder talked about a painting of the rock at Hickory Ridge.
That's in here.
So it wasn't in it, there's no other area that says you can't paint our school material, our property?
I think F, that covers that one.
Yeah.
That F. The A.
I would have just thought that there's some other policy.
You're wondering whether there's a school property policy, for example.
Right, defaces.
I don't know that.
Do we have a rock painting policy?
No, other.
Or a guideline.
I did inquire to Mr. Taylor, Chuck Taylor, about have we had issues. He said, yes, they have a high pressure washer type thing that will blast the paint off of it. And they have been called out a few times with that. I know I personally witnessed one several years back, saw a rock with some inappropriate language that fortunately that particular school's custodial staff had some black spray paint, and they came out and promptly took care of that.
But we just said we don't have any prohibition against that?
Well,
Yeah, it was inappropriate language is what was on.
I was going to say, there are several policies that deal with defacing, and whether that's the disruptive behavior 14315 or 4328, that's gang prohibition, or, I'm sorry,
That's for students.
yes.
That doesn't
Yes.
address the adults or the.
Oh, well, we arrest them, right?
That's just for students. So I think from the policy committee, even when they spoke about it, again, it's, like Dr. Lowder said, it's a board decision. We're perfectly comfortable with whatever the board decides as long as we try to be non-disruptive to students, was that on any given day, with the way our policy currently reads, we could have 8, 10 people in different schools having access to emails, having access to teachers' mailboxes, having access to teacher conversations in conference rooms, all because we've allowed one to do it. We have to allow them all to do it. And so the goal of the policy committee was, as Dr. Lowder said, just to try to limit all disruption to the school day and for our students. And so that's our goal. That's
And I
it.
think the way we've been guided in the past was you can't come into the front office and have the front clerical person distribute it for them because that's campaigning. So all that puts the school personnel in a pretty bad position, meaning like, so now I have to kind of judge and decide, and, well, you can go in there and put it in, but I can't help you, and meanwhile the phone's ringing. I mean, it's just it can be a pretty big disturbance. So again, I know there's been some precedent for that. In our district, we've done that. It sounds like most of the ones that we've talked to before, they don't necessarily permit that, but evidently that's all up to the board to decide if that's something that we're going to permit people to do. The rock, I think, rocks, my understanding, originated with people are, defacing buildings. So when you put a rock out front, they'll paint the rock and not the side of the building. So it was to encourage people, or I guess discourage people from painting the sides where it came from. But once that becomes a political tool, then again, when there's inappropriate language on there, we paint over it. But that doesn't make national news like the political stuff has the potential to.
I kind of believe that the word distribution needs the word mass in front of it. Mass distribution, or distribution by the dozens and the hundreds, or things of that nature.
Which item are you, which sentence, David?
Anywhere through here that's talking about the distribution or the display of material, what we're getting at here is lots of stuff brought to the school to be given out somehow. Or a mass distribution is what we're trying to address here, of items, as opposed to individual student attire and individual speech and individual expression, which we are not trying to control or prohibit. We are trying to control the logistics of mass distribution of stuff at the school. That would help me understand the purpose of the policy a bit better.
Yeah, I was worried with adjectives like mass. How do you define it?
In large quantity,
Yeah.
the 100 employees, 100 things, but not individual statements or expressions of belief or opinion.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
During the policy committee, we did ask Ms. Jones if she could check and see how many other districts did not allow materials to be put in their boxes in their system. We just, out of curiosity, was wondering how many did not allow stuff to be
Well,
put
on
in.
short notice and with a holiday in there, I've had 22 districts respond so far. And in our region, Rowan, Salisbury, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Gaston, Stanley, and then outside, there's, I said 22, but Wake, some of the big counties like Wake and Charlotte, Mecklenburg are on here. And none of those districts, out of the 22 that have responded so far, only one county allowed any campaign materials to be put in boxes, and that was Mitchell County.
So
And that
only
was
one out of the 22
One out of the
permitted.
22. All the others were no, and all of them had policies. And they've sent me the policy numbers. I just haven't had an opportunity to match the language yet to see. But I think I forwarded a couple things to Brian. I haven't been able to send him all of it yet.
Okay, that sounds pretty overwhelming, that we're kind of lagging behind in that area, maybe. And I have always been one to put things in mailboxes, but I understand. Okay, so on policy 5210, what do we want to pursue? Do we want to take it to action, as is. Any slight modifications?
I'd like to add it to the January agenda, and just so we can take our time and do it right. Maybe for the work session in January.
Okay, others?
I'd like to move forward as is.
Well, my thing is, if it moves forward, I would like to be recused from it, because I feel like that I personally, since I am running, that if it's voted on as is, that I have a conflict.
Dr. Kirk?
Would you have a conflict if we did it in January?
Well, at that time, I wouldn't have a conflict. I'm not running in January.
When does the running start?
When does the running start?
You're running for 4 years from
I'm
then.
right now, I have a conflict.
Madam Chair, I'd like to see this delayed till after the elections are over. I think a lot of people have already invested time and effort on the current paradigm, and you've got to front load your election, and so I support Mr. Powell's recommendation. Roll it for a couple months.
Mr. Walter, your preference?
I'm not terribly comfortable with the way the wording is now. It doesn't seem, yeah, I'm okay with delaying it, but I think the policy committee needs more work on this before it
Okay.
comes to the board.
Were you at the policy meeting this time?
I was not able to make the policy meeting.
Because I'd say, I know you're on that committee. Mr. Harrison, your preference?
It's a can of worms. I mean, the office of any school needs to run the school business, needs to open the door, and the parents and the children come in, the bus drivers and all the other activity of a school is intense enough without us and our supporters kind of knocking on the door and complicating things as well. I mean, I've done this, where I go and put cards in people's boxes and then get the heck out. But I know I'm in the way.
Yeah.
I truly know that it's awkward. Get out. You know, what's your business there in terms of the instructional day?
Yeah. Okay, could I offer a middle ground? Could we accept only page 3, letter F? So we don't have things that are intended for students become a source of kind of advertising on campus. I worry that we get into a equal time. If that person was allowed to do it, then the next person needs to be allowed to do it, and it may be never ending.
I would support A through F and then putting G on a future policy committee review for the consideration of addition of something like the current wording for G in the future.
Yeah, I think A to G's the problem that we've got, because people's already bought materials. We've always put materials in. I think that's where the problem is, and we have done that. And
it's really the quality of the candy you put in there, you know that.
well, it's not candy. See, mine's the boxes. And that's where I have a problem. And when I say conflict, there's a lot of candidates that's running right now. They're not known. And with me voting, when I say conflict, if I voted on this, some people may come back and say, Carpenter's been out there 12 years. I haven't been out there. And the conflict is, some people would see this, that I'm well known and I'm voting on this for my interest. And this is where I'm saying conflict of interest. And so that's
Okay.
why G, if we remove this, that conflict would be gone.
Okay, so can we accept 5210 with only the change to letter F at this time? I would ask you, though, don't destroy this copy so that it can be re-reviewed by policy committee. Okay. Is that okay with the rest? Except letter F? Okay, and put that on consent? Okay. Consent with only letter F included. Okay, then we'll, ready for the next one, 5240.
5240 is in this group as well, advertising in schools.
This is also one that our office came up with. Again, asked to look at these policies, but we regard it very much as a board decision. We just want to make sure that whatever you do is going to be applied equally and consistently, so there's no discrimination one way or the other. In section D4, the old language, or the current language, is no advertising through employee and student email system and school system websites. And the language that was added was to try to be, I guess, more proactive, recognizing that there are a lot of different modes. There are more modes of communication now than existed then. So it's designed to be more expansive. The same policy or same concept, but to apply to the breadth of media we have now. Number 10, 5240, was designed to match that section F that the board was comfortable with on 5210 about painting or modifying language. So that might be non-controversial. And 11, just to, I hope we have it worded correctly, but this would be somebody, for example, making an advertising with school property in the advertisement or a school venue as a part of the advertisement. And then that could look like endorsement, for example, because they have access to school property and they've used it for an advertising purpose. So that's what section 11 is designed to deal with. Mr. Walter was not present at our policy committee meeting, but he did submit a suggestion that it was kind of rushed meeting, but he thought there that if we're going to have number 11, it should be add without permission of the board. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Oh, that's a good addition. So just put that at the end of 11?
Yes, and that does look like a pretty good addition, I think. Then it gives the board flexibility to do something if it's appropriate.
Don't we sell advertisements to go on lots of our facilities? I.e. scoreboards? Whoops.
There's also a
We-
commercial that was filmed at some of our schools too, right? Commercials that have been filmed at some of our schools also.
Yes, and I think that's addressed in D1 and 2, and maybe some others. But the advertising is permitted in yearbooks, newsletters. Number 2, stadium, athletic billboards, etc. So I think there's discussion at the policy committee. There's no intent to ban advertisements per se. But those are all approved. They generally pay a fee. It's equal basis. There's an issue about, well, what about acknowledging donations or sponsors? And that's permissible. That's in number 3. So if somebody donates something to the school system, we can have a program certainly acknowledging and thanking the donor. That's not considering us advertising for the donor. That's just acknowledging somebody who supports the school system. But we're not saying go then buy that person's product. Just we thank so-and-so for this.
Okay, so in 5240, with the addition at the end of item D11 on page 3, as suggested by Mr. Walter, are there any other changes or exclusions, anything that the board is interested in?
I just don't see what 10 and 11 are accomplishing that is not accomplished up above in the first part of this policy. again, we didn't hear, was this a board recommended? Where'd this thing originate?
All of these were requested to go to the policy committee and then turned over to the attorneys for language.
By us?
Yes.
Who wanted this one? Was this you,
No,
Cindy?
I just asked in general, should we start looking at that because we have different situations happening, so, and Mr. Taylor also.
What situation is 10 and 11 addressing that you're aware
I
of?
didn't recommend the changes, so I have to think.
These also were all tied together, so when you
Yeah.
fixed one, you had to go then to the next policy. And so 10 actually is a direct correlation to F in the previous policies. That's why I think
The
the
painting
attorney
of
went there and then,
I just don't generally like the practice of creating a policy just for the sake of creating a policy. It's kind of gotten us in trouble in the past that we've had to spend months and months, or I have had to spend months and months to try to dig up information and find and get others on board and have meetings and all kinds of, things. So, if it doesn't solve a specific problem that we're aware of, or a systemic problem, then I say just, I don't think this is necessary.
Okay, board members, do we want to take 50, I guess Ms. Carpenter already asked to have that one go to action. 5240 as is for a vote up or down? Action. Hearing none. Okay, that will go on action.
All right, and then the last one, what, 52?
No, 7720 is next.
Just for clarification, when you mentioned as is, does as is include
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Walters'
With Mr. Walters' suggestion at the end.
suggestion? Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry, yes. So 7720,
The only change they had on that one, that whole paragraph needs to be taken out because that's putting exactly what we have in that last one.
so I think 7720 just needs to be postponed to January as well. Does that sound right?
It's of a piece with
That's,
the other policy, yes.
that's exactly right.
And anything else that is tangential to this topic.
Right.
Can we bundle them all together in the January?
Absolutely. And like we said, this is a very complicated topic. And so, I welcome the concept of having a little bit more time to study it. We can also find a few more examples from some other school systems. We just wanted to make sure that it was brought to the board for possible action in advance of November if there are steps the board wants to take.
Hey, I would like to get more numbers on that to see how many are. I know Kannapolis, they quit it. They quit it, excuse me. They stopped, that doesn't sound well. They stopped it maybe, I would say, what, 5?
Long time ago?
Yeah, they stopped it maybe 5 years ago or longer.
Okay, so on our policy summary chart, the first 4 will be on consent. 5015 will be on action. 5210 will be on action only with the letter F. The rest will be, actually, no, that one will go to consent, I'm sorry, because that was taking everything out except the letter F change. And then 5240 will add Mr. Walters' statement and go on action. 7720, we will hold in its entirety until January. Okay. Yes, 5210 will be, the rest will be considered in January. Okay. Okay. Thank you, ladies. We knew that was going to be a discussion. Okay, next we have 4.02, the consideration of the 2019-20 Cabarrus County Schools academic calendar, and Deputy Superintendent Ms. Reimer.
thank you, Madam Chair. So our calendar committee has been meeting over many months to look at the 2019-2020 school calendar. It should be in board docs. They considered a lot of different options, as there's lots of discussion around about split calendars as well as a year-round calendar. However, After much discussion and debate, the calendar committee is recommending a very traditional calendar for the 1920 school year.
Any board comments, discussion?
I think that's a wise move.
Yes.
So
And it's good.
we get the 2 full weeks of Christmas, is that what that?
Oh, that's what it looks like.
Short, yes.
Can I ask, November 5th of 2019 and May 5th, 2020, who knows what the state of North Carolina might do, but as best as we know from our Cabarrus Board of Elections, are those dates locked and loaded and shall be the spring primary and the fall, I'm sorry, the fall primary and this, whatever, the 2 dates of those 2 years?
Yes, sir. And
As best as we know right now.
Yeah, we went ahead as well as a committee and also put the day in May, so we wouldn't have the situation we had this year. So we have for our spring, or if they don't switch it back, we'll have March 10th and May 5th, both as teacher work days. So if they were to switch those, we would already have those as teacher work days.
Board members, consent agenda acceptable?
I'd prefer action. Are these calendars available right now through board docs?
Yeah, it's on board docs. That's where we're seeing it.
I also agree with action, see if anyone has any comments on it
Okay.
before we vote on it.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll invite Ms. Kelly Klutz to join us for the budget amendments.
Thank you. We have just a few budget amendments before you today, starting with the state budget amendment. There's several on here. Some are small, some are larger. I'll hit a couple of those, and if you have questions about any of the others, just let me know. There's a $20,000 reduction you see there for the cooperative, innovative high schools, early colleges. And when I was doing my planning, I knew there was a $20,000 reduction in the budget this year, but I forgot we had 2 schools, so that equals $40,000. So I had to make that adjustment. Then the last adjustment there is a reduction in state grant funding for SROs. So we were hopeful that we would get more this year for our SROs. We did not. We got $68,000 less as reflected in that budget amendment. But we also did get a grant of $255,000 out of the same funding stream that we're extremely grateful for. There's 5 positions, and that is not reflected here yet because DPI has not dropped those funds yet. So I'm sure you'll see that. We'll see that next month. Okay. Questions on state? Okay. Over to local. So the first adjustment there is a reduction of $77,631 in our county allocation. That was the funds that we had asked for to start up the Hickory Ridge Elementary School. As you recall, we also asked for the startup of the high school, but that was already removed from the budget prior to this, and so Hickory Ridge was left in, and so we've now removed it. You will see that money coming back in the capital side, because what they've done is said, we're not going to need it in operations this year, so we're going to let you spend it on a one-time expenditure, and then it'll go back to operations the following year. So you'll see that on the capital side. Okay. The next entry is to allocate funds so that we can cover our SRO contracts with the reduction in the state and then the increases in salaries and benefits for the SROs so that we can continue those contracts.
Can you go into a bit more detail about that? Is that 127,000 a permanent reduction, or as best as we know, or?
So the reduction from the state was $69,000 on the other budget amendment that we had here. 68,007. But then when there are salary adjustment and benefit adjustments for the security officers, our contracts amount increase, so we have to cover that too. So that is that's ample amount of money to cover those contracts. Actually, it's probably a little bit too much, but it'll just stay in that SRO account and roll over.
So we're good on SRO coverage.
Absolutely. We've got it covered. Okay. So we'll move on to federal. These are just minor adjustments, difference in planning allotment and actual allotment, and there's always an indirect cost element with federal. We're always just chasing that a little bit. Okay. Finally is our capital. You can see there the first adjustment is a timing entry. It's strictly an accounts payable from one year to another. And then the final entry is there where the $406,000 came into the capital account for those the school openings. The one thing that the county asked us to spend out of those dollars was the Beverly Hills studies, the $20,000. And then the next item would be the next item in our capital outlay list of priorities. And that just automatically fell to security cameras. Okay, are there any questions on the budget amendments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and those will go to the consent agenda. Next, we have the, I guess you want to say, the City of Concord SRO contract.
Okay. So last year at this time, I brought to you the SRO contract for the city and the county. Last year, we approved a county contract that extended over 5 years. So the county is good. We don't have to do anything. Just bringing you today the city contract. We have asked the city to change it from a 1 year to a 2 year. We did 2 years because that aligns with the grant funding that we get from the state. We're all comfortable with that and feel like that's a good change for us. So assuming everything gets passed this year, we'll just do the city every 2 years and the county every 5 years. And it's here for your review. We'll be glad to address any questions that you have. I know we've had a few earlier today, and I believe we've answered most of those.
You all okay for that on consent? Yes? Okay. Thank you. Next, we'll go to item 4.05, the alternative accountability model options with Mr. Matthew Fail.
Good evening. Hopefully you've had a chance to review the alternative accountability option that we've chosen. We've chosen option B. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take those now.
And this is the same as last year, right?
It is slightly different, yes, because last year's option's not available, which was simply to send the data back to the schools. Essentially, if the school has enough data in that year, they will get a school performance grade using this alternative model, which gives a lot more value to growth. There's also a 20% element for the kids staying in school, and then 20% for the academic piece that's normally the part of the school performance grade, if they have enough data. If they don't have enough data, that's that last column right there, we can choose to use 3 years worth of data or return the scores back to the home school. So we chose return the scores back to the home school, which is what we've been doing in the past.
Still option B, right?
Yes, it's still option B. It's just a different option B.
Any questions or discussion?
So this applies to just 2 schools within our district, is that right?
Yes, sir. It applies to the PLC and the Opportunity School, and both principals were supportive of option B.
So how does the 20% work with a school like the Opportunity School, the 20% student persistence?
So basically, they look at the total number of students in the school for the year. Let's just make the math easy and say 100 kids attended the school. If 90 of those kids remained in a North Carolina public school, then you would have a 90%.
Thank
So it's not the particular school, it's a North Carolina public school.
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions? Okay, consent agenda? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
For item 4.06 regarding the nomination for an NCSBA Board of Directors, I would actually like to change that and recommend that Mr. Shoemaker be nominated by our board to participate or to be considered for the North Carolina School Board Board of Directors.
I'd second that. If we
Well, we're not going to vote tonight, but this can go on consent or it can go on action. Consent?
Who is writing this essay?
I will probably write it on his behalf if he gives me some information. You do.
Just for Okay, for clarification, it does say that you need to complete a one-page essay describing how and why this person could make a positive contribution to the School Board Association.
So I will have that. Typically, on these things, we don't post on Board Doc because some of it contains personal information that is meant only for the application. So we can still put on consent or we can put on action, but you'll just receive that privately. So. Yeah. I have reminded Mr. Dunlap of the executive director of the association that Cabarrus County Schools has not been represented in the past 20 years, and it is time. So hopefully they will seriously consider us. And our challenge is we are in the same region as Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and they almost always include a CMS representative. So that takes one of the seats right there. So the rest of us are there to scramble. So can this go on consent? Okay. And next we have our action items. And the first, really the only, I think, except for the discussion, which will not necessarily be an action item. Yeah, after we finish this one. So Mr. Lowder and Mr. Cohn are here to talk about releasing budgeted contingency funds for Hickory Ridge Elementary School.
As many of you may be aware, we've encountered a little more rock on the site at the new elementary school than we had first anticipated. We have tried to quantify those further with a lot more exploration and actually using lots larger track hoe than was required by the specifications to do so. And in quantifying it, we will see us probably overrun our rock quantities by approximately 12,000 yards. And in doing so, the money to cover that would be through the contingency that the county has already budgeted for us, and we're just asking they release that contingency so that we can pay that bill ahead of time instead of after the fact, if you will, because that's not allowed by state law.
Okay, and this still allows us to retain $475,000 in the contingency.
Yes, ma'am.
Fund.
We're asking for $600,000 of the contingency to be released, which we will actually have about $86,000 more than we anticipate right now, but you don't know with rock, it may. Yeah.
Right, and these are all estimates.
Yes, ma'am.
So. Okay, any discussion? The county has already been made aware of this request?
Yes.
So, any discussion, concerns? Okay, that will need to go in action because of...
I just want to say, it took me a while to decipher this sheet.
Yeah.
I had to go through the numbers a bunch of times to figure out what is he trying to tell me, but I figured it out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure you were aware we were already utilizing all the allowances that we felt like we could release now without asking for a contingency first. That's why you have the line items.
Okay. So
Thank you.
I think we'll have that approved next week for you.
Just don't run into any water now.
And then the commissioners' work session, I believe, will be on, is it the 17th? And they will vote on it at that time to release the budgeted funds. Okay, so now we are to the item which we added to the agenda regarding Mr. Powell's request about to discuss the process about how this came to light, or?
Yes, ma'am. So all of us received an email or two regarding I guess the change in how certain groups were allowed to use facilities going through the PTA and the PTO. We received, I guess, a couple of emails that kind of outlined how groups, and I can speak firsthand from being on a PTA board or two, that PTA boards scramble to find programming to satisfy their give back requirements. And it's more PTA than it is PTO, but they both use the same sort of guidelines. So they're always looking for outside groups to provide opportunities for students. And so when they find one that is available, it's really an awesome thing. And so they're able to bring in outside groups through the PTA or PTO, and they provide enrichment opportunities. And in every case, they donate part of what is paid to the company back to the school. And so, you know, it's kind of worked real well. Well, I guess the week before school or so, it was told to them that they would not be able to do that anymore because they were in fact using the facility and they needed to go through the facility use agreement form instead of the PTA, PTO process.
Yeah. Mr. Powell, I just want to clarify, they were not told they could not use, to my knowledge. It was that it was, as a for-profit company, they needed to complete the facilities use form.
Right.
Is that how you understand it?
In
They
the
weren't told
arrangement,
they can't do it.
they were not able to operate under the arrangement that they had previously been operating under. Is that accurate to say? And so, which is just kind of sad because, you know, I didn't really know a whole lot about it other than the fact that my kid has participated in several of those, several kids of mine. And so I got to kind of finding out more about it, and these programs are offered generally at a time where the building is occupied anyway, and they're offered in schools at such a reduced rate that we can offer it at low economic type school environments where the kids can pay a very small fee and still participate in some of these programs, whereas, you know, we don't just send it just to the affluent areas. So that was part of my concern, and that was one of my concerns. The other one was the timing of it, where parents and students were already kind of planning to participate, and now because of the economics of it, some schools are not going to be able to be provided the same level of service. It's only, essentially, it's only the affluent schools, which I really don't like. That was just kind of my take on the whole thing, and I just make sure I'm on base here.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, the rest of the board understands or what, but it was actually based on an inquiry you had made earlier this year, Mr. Powell, about appropriate forms being filled out for groups using school property. That and administration at the principals' meetings late in the summer reminded them that they needed to have proper forms completed for use of their facilities. I believe that's how it came out. So it was really following your earlier guidance, ironically.
Of which we never received those forms, by the way. We just received an explanation. Nope. Only for one, not the second one, which I had to follow up on multiple times.
I thought everything was responded to.
It was responded to, but the request was for the form, not a response, but we could read the form ourselves. But at any rate, so the change came about the week before school, which I thought was just in poor taste because there were already agreements in place with schools. So now we're either, you know, going to break the agreement or cancel on the day of open house, which I just think is in poor taste.
I guess Mr. Shaw, and I don't think we want to really get into all the details tonight because we're probably going to give Mr. Shaw more time to review this, but which is why I was suggesting it goes to the policy committee to review and see if there could be adjustments made for if there was an agreement, a contracted usage, basically fill out the form if there was some way we could do for a documented, guaranteed kind of contribution to the school. But I think the key thing is that, and Mr. Shaw, correct me if I'm wrong, that the PTOs cannot basically provide our facilities. Because I had completed a facilities use form recently, and it has a lot of questions on there about liability and responsibility and whatnot. So that has to go through, I guess, the principal approval to do that.
Yeah, I wasn't really called into that one till the late end, but I think it's all stuff that the policy committee could address. That's exactly what you do on policies. You have a policy that looks great. You get a circumstance that might not quite fit. So should we apply the policy as is? Should we adjust the policy? I think the concern was we have a policy, let's make sure it's applied appropriately going forward. And then if we need to change the policy for certain types of enrichment programs, you could have a PTA affiliated program, perhaps a different price structure. You could have a give back. There are various options you can do, and I think it's a good idea for the policy committee to get onto it.
I would be extremely supportive of the policy committee intervening and making sure that that is kind of addressed in a formal fashion. I would also like for us to consider being able to honor the agreements that these groups, which are, there's many that are out there, not just the ones that we've heard from, because my kids have participated in others, and I'm not going to say their name because Cindy will go find them and cancel them. We all know that. So,
Mr. Powell, I do need to intervene on that, in that I had nothing to do with these particular groups. I was trying to ensure that we were equally applying the requirements, honestly, again, based on your expressed desire that we need to make sure we have our I's dotted, T's crossed.
Wasn't my expressed desire, I just asked for a form. And
So are we allowed to grandfather any of these organizations? Is that legal?
Well, so
I think that's
the
what we need to
issue
look
is,
at.
the issue is that the agreements were already in place to start the school year. And so they were just kind of long-standing agreements that have gone on for many years now, since I've got a kid in high school. He was participating years ago. So I think that we should, at the very least, honor those current agreements and allow them to participate for this school year, and then we can work on adjusting the policy as we go.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, Ms. Klutz, I know, was looking at this, communicating with one of the owners, and I don't think there were any written agreements. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. I communicated extensively with one person in particular, and there was nothing in writing, no written contract that we could, no, I can't speak for the other group, but certainly there was nothing for the one.
Okay, but you can have a verbal contract if there's a history of it in there. I mean, there's got to be somebody there that says.
Yeah, except it's not the property owner is the challenge, I think.
Right, that's what I was thinking too. If the expectation is for the program to continue and it was allowed for 4 years previous, I think that's right. That's right. So I would just recommend that we allow the groups, the enrichment groups that are working through the parent-teacher organizations, whatever they are, to continue for this year, working through their arrangements with the principal, and kind of give that responsibility back to the principal for this year, and while the policy committee works through the formal pieces of that.
I guess I would like at this point to maybe have our attorney get up to speed on what has transpired so far and report back to us with what might be the risk of other groups, other for-profit agencies who may want to use our facilities free of charge in exchange for a scholarship to a program or whatever it might be.
But these instances are specifically going through the PTOs, is that correct?
Well, these two, but like Mr. Powell said, there apparently are others as well. We don't know what the arrangements are with everyone.
I can certainly look into it. I think the issue is always going to be, is this fair treatment, and if you give a waiver to one group, does some other group then come by and say, why didn't I get the waiver? Now, that can all be addressed. You can say it only applies to groups that had received approval, that had been in operation for more than 1 year, or whatever. That can be addressed if it's the board's desire, but it's not anything that I know much about other than the fact that there's been some correspondence on it. I'd be glad to look into it this week.
I like,
There we go. Can we quantify it? How many groups are we talking about? 4 or 40 or 400? And then what's our risk? What's our exposure? What's the risk analysis? If I got 4 groups that are doing it, and I've got some kind of breakage or injury, who's liable? The American dream or the American nightmare, being sued. So what's our exposure, and how many groups are we talking about?
And that's the thing, we need to get that information from the superintendent, or superintendent needs to get from the principals, I guess, is what is going on, and even, think broadly, groups that you may not have thought were subject to the policy. We need to know how many of these groups there are. I think it's easier to make decisions, as you say, if you have, are we doing it for 2 groups, are we doing it for 30, and how many people are going to come and claim that they were not given the same fair treatment?
And our understanding after looking into that is there is no liability coverage for themed groups. They're relying on the fact that the school is covering it, which goes back to using the facility without. Now, I'm not saying that that's completely true. There may be some nuances of that, but I would say even the issue that Mr. Powell asked us to look into that began this whole process was something that was going on previously. So therefore, do we go back and let that person continue, which is something that I think Mr. Powell did not agree with. So even that was a process that was going on.
you never asked me. We've never had a conversation about this or any other thing, so don't speak for me, and I won't speak for you.
Okay, well, we got an email from you alleging that something improper was happening, and we investigated it and discovered that what you alleged was true. So the point would be, if that was continuing, wouldn't this then grandfather the original issue that Mr. Powell directed us to look at? That would be something that I think would be problematic. But again, that was where we started with the process.
So as far as the liability is concerned, are the 2 groups that they have liability insurance?
Well, I think that's something Mr. Shaw can direct staff.
Dr. Lowder just said they don't have liability insurance. I'm just wondering, they're here to represent themselves.
We're not going to start having people address us tonight, but.
We don't want information from the
No,
public.
I think that's information we need to obtain, but we need to start with how many groups are possibly in this situation. I fully expect, with the number of schools we have, that it's not limited to 2 groups who have verbalized their concerns right now. And there may be other groups who wish to speak up to say, I could no longer bring my program to your school because of the facilities use fee. So, and something else in talking to different individuals about this particular case or circumstance was, because it is happening, as you said, Mr. Powell, after school while their staff are there, are staff assisting these programs? Are they responsible if someone gets sick while in those programs? How is staff being involved? So I think there's just probably a list of questions that we need to get answered, including the items that would need to be completed on the facilities use form. Whether there's some grandfathered situation included or not. So I think we still need to have the questions on the facilities use form answered. So.
Would it be possible for us to come up with in the next week before our regular meeting, you're not Richard, are you? Brian?
Brian.
Sorry. Just as Brian indicated, just maybe a short list of criteria that would possibly be able to grandfather those that have participated in the past year, maybe, to be able to continue participation, like the liability insurance, like the only using it certain times as they are, that type of thing. Just a short list that we could discuss at the meeting next week and make a decision on, just because here we are at the beginning of the school year.
That
on the face of it, Mr. Powell, sounds like it would circumvent the policy committee somehow. Maybe that's not the actual outcome, but the process ought to start with the policy committee so that it is all integrated together throughout the different policies. Several years ago, policy committee spent an inordinate amount of time. Y'all worked me to the bone about this policy, facilities use, as well as the rate sheet, and we thought we had it buttoned down. And now we find this, and I feel like the little dyke boy, finding situations where there is some risk, as Dr. Kirk alludes to, and it needs to be reviewed again to, if for no other reason than to re-emphasize our stewardship of the community's resources and facilities. So it needs some careful review.
So when is the next policy committee meeting? In about 4 weeks? 3 weeks? End of September? 2 weeks. Okay.
So as Mr. Walter said, for the groups that have worked through the schools and through their working agreement for several years, then those agreements are just broken, I guess, until the policy committee meets. That's what I would like to avoid, is to just give them an opportunity to continue if they meet certain criteria. And if they don't, then they don't. If you're having an after-school group and you don't have liability insurance, then you don't have an after-school group. That's just kind of my thoughts on that.
I will just refer to with my audit hat on, which is part of my career, and that is, once you are aware of a situation, you are culpable if something does occur for which you are liable. So you can't wait for information. You are immediately responsible once you know. So I guess I would really like to send it to the policy committee.
That's not true. I can give you a list of things that I've brought to your attention that you just table or ignore, but that's okay. I would like for us to maybe be able to decide if those groups could meet some basic criteria to continue for this year while the policy committee process works through it.
And I think all we're asking is to give the policy this month and bring it forward to the work session in October, the beginning of October. I don't know that all these answers can be had in the next week.
But don't we have a time critical issue? I mean, I don't know when these programs start, but it sounds like to me like it's a time critical issue.
It's my understanding, based on communication to all of us, that they were set and ready to recruit at open house, and it was told the day of open house that they would not be able to operate under their previous agreements with those schools. So, yeah, you're right, time is of the essence.
I think our staff honestly needs to focus on their regular jobs, and there's a lot of information to be gathered. So, is there a consensus to allow the attorney to guide the policy committee, obtain additional information for the work session at the beginning of October?
According to the normal policy cycle.
Yeah, normal process, but obviously put this as a priority topic. Yeah, so that it does get addressed.
Then even if you have changes, now you're talking November, December before it's ever approved.
Well, I think we as a board can make the decision at that point when we have the more information and the guidance.
I think by next week they could tell us how many groups that we have that are affected here. That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, keep in mind, we don't have a full-time attorney who's going to do nothing but this for the next week. So. Can we send this to policy committee? I'm hearing that's generally acceptable.
If it's a time critical issue, and if we're thinking what's in the best interest of the students, and these are enrichment opportunities that help our students, and we need to make a decision.
Yeah, we're only missing
Correct.
potentially 1 month of sessions if we make a decision in early October. if this was a really quick answer, we would have had it by now. But we have a policy that was adopted, we voted on it, we accepted it, and now we're asking for an exception for for-profit companies. So, and I'm all for the enrichment, we need to handle it properly.
But is it an exception or is it grandfather? So that's,
Well, that's what we need guidance
I
on.
I think we step out of the way and allow the groups to work under their agreements, but then offer some guidance as to what those requirements would be.
Yeah, as
And
much-
maybe that's a quick conversation with the attorney about liability insurance, is basically it. And then we let the policy committee work in the background so that next year, all these groups are following the same kind of guidelines.
We don't, but we don't, the problem is, Vince, we don't have any agreements. Where were the agreements? If we had them in writing, we had agreements to go with, I'd say fine and dandy, but they keep saying we don't have any agreements. Where are the agreements? That's what I mean, do we have some? I'm hearing two things. We've got them, we don't have them. Where are they? Do we? Do you know that?
When a group works in a school for 3 or 4 years and it's agreed on with the principal that we're planning to come back and we're going to recruit in the exact same fashion, I think whether it's written or not, I think it's still an agreement. Now, was it a binding contract? I don't think so, but I don't know. I
Our
think that
attorney went to, I see him nodding his head. Well, what, is it an agreement or is it not? I mean, that's what I need to know. I see you down there nodding your head. Are you a bobblehead or are you saying something?
It's both.
Okay.
No, I would say, I always have a problem in knowing what an agreement is if I can't read it.
Me too.
If it can be described to me orally, but I need to do more understanding and questioning to understand it. Generally, matter of contract law, there can be oral agreements.
Okay.
I think use of school facilities probably legally would require a written agreement.
And that's what I'm usually used to. But can you grandfather an oral agreement? I've never grandfathered an oral agreement.
I think on this, the board can do whatever it wants, and we will do whatever it wants to make it work. You just have to do so with the understanding of what are the ramifications to the policy committee, what are the ramifications to other groups. Do you want it done this week? And so administrators spending their time this week on this or spending their time on other things. It all depends on how important it is to the board, and whatever the board wants to do, we will, from attorney standpoint, we'll do it.
The only thing I want to mention is I work with a lot of our principals, and I work with them directly related to this, and I would say the majority of them do work through their PTAs and PTOs and thought it was okay until they understood that they were violating policy. So I want you to be aware of that. So principals didn't create contracts or agreements with anybody. They just thought the PTO was doing this, and so therefore they agreed with the PTO. So in the principal's defense, I have to say that. We're not going out just doing anything, but at the same time, they didn't know it was against board policy, and as soon as they heard it's against board policy, they fully agree that they want to follow what we expect, because a lot of other people have asked to use the facility for whatever reason for profit, and they've had to deny it. So they did not want to be put in the position where they would allow some to do it and some not to do it when they realized the situation they were in.
Do the principals need clarity?
They do not now. I assure you that.
Yeah, this was an item on the August principals agenda, so it was not, principals were not notified the day of open house. This was a agenda item for our pre-K-12
So
principals
you're
meeting in
indicating there's
August.
multiple groups from this discussion at multiple different schools.
Yes.
It seems that we need to probably
And there's,
Again, let me be really clear that our principals work very closely with our PTOs and those people that are trying to help raise money and that are family and friends to the school, and that's how this has occurred. If someone walks off the street and wants to rent the facility, they know the process very clearly. It's been through our PTO and PTAs for-profit companies that's been the question, and so that's what we had to address in August.
I mean, since it affects the PTOs and it ultimately affects the students, I really think, if we made this change just 1 month and we just gave them this notice that we're doing things differently, that we probably should consider grandfathering as we put things in place and notify folks.
It's not a change, so it has been our policy the entire time. The other thing that I would say, just briefly, and I don't want to argue, because I really don't want to argue, because it's not up to me, it's up to the board. I'm just trying to make sure you understand the principal's point of view, is that I want to make sure I do what's right, and we thought that it was not, I don't know that they necessarily knew it was for profit as well. They thought, it's working through my PTO, my PTA, we're not that involved. Are these for-profit companies? So that's a difference. When we have nonprofits, they're very clear.
I think there's a lot of components that need to be reviewed. And so I'll ask again, can I have a show of hands to
Can
Yes.
I offer my opinion?
Sure.
Everyone else has. First, there are a couple issues that are at the bottom of this, and one is the liability issue. And so the other one is the potential for other outside entities that are profit-making perceiving us to be discriminatory and allowing, because there was no bid, there was no open access there, you have an opportunity that these agreements were made. So what I would offer, and I want, I just had a, yes, thank you. Brian, I'm sorry, I was trying to use your name properly. I didn't want to say first name, but yeah. So I'd like to ask Mr. Shaw, as far as liability insurance, with these organizations, and if something were to happen, how do we, as an organization, become liable since we really don't have any agreements or any information about them? And would that be the first thing that you would want us as a organization to make sure that we did have covered?
That's exactly right. There's a provision of school law which provides that a board will not be liable for allowing outside organizations to use school facilities pursuant to agreements that are covered by board policy. So if you have an agreement like that, then you can prevent the board from having liability. If we don't have agreements, then we're far away from this. It's always good to have liability insurance anyway, because there may be liability for school staff, even if the board's immune. Plus, you want insurance for somebody who might be injured. So I think liability insurance is a very good thing to have. That'd be my number one concern.
Now, second thing is to fend off the discrimination possibility that someone would say that we were unfairly allowing access. Could we do a temporary grandfather to say the end of the year that would allow the policy committee and then form and create a temporary agreement that would cover for that interval of time, so the policy committee could actually put some language together for how these agreements with the PTO, PTA organizations that want to be supported? Would it be hard to put something together that then these organizations could look at and say, all right, I'm willing to abide by these terms until the end of the year, and in the meantime we would be working on something a little bit more forthright? Is there something that is a simple document that would require liability insurance, that they would cover that, and then give them the grandfather until the end of the year, and of course that would sunset, and so then we would be dealing with this past practice in a proper way, but at the same time we would say this past practice has closing and therefore end it, and then start it with a new practice.
I think you could do that, and that would be a fairly simple document to come up with. We'd have to give some thought to it, but we could come up with that. I think the main thing is to avoid this discrimination argument. You have criteria, and you only apply it to certain people who meet certain criteria. Whether, for example, having done it last year is certainly one criteria. What about do it for having done it for 2 years? You know, the longer they've done it, the more equity it seems like they have built up, and it looks less discriminatory. Certainly, anybody who didn't do it last year, I don't think would have a basis to complain for a grandfather that you did like that. But I would need some guidance. Do we want 1 year? Do we want 2 years? What do we want to do? It would have to be approved by the principal. I mean, by the PTO. We could come up with some criteria.
I would also, could we also add in the criteria of already requested, so this meeting has no impact on new requests. It has to be somebody that has already requested and has a history. I'd be comfortable with that.
Well, yeah, and that was where I was headed, Mr. Powell. It's only the ones who are directly impacted that had existing programs. And if you want to say a year, that's fine. But the bottom line is it sunsets at the end of the year, gives the policy committee enough time to put together something. And we do have a sunset provision which protects us from our past practice, because now we've served notice that we realize we had a past practice. We need to remedy the past practice, and then we start off on a new foot on this date. So therefore, that then people who want to say we discriminated couldn't say that, because we realized that we had a problem and we are sunsetting it as of this date. But still, we realize that we have the children that have been impacted by this that benefit from this program, and we are covered as a board from the liability side, which really is the chief piece that I want to make sure the district is covered and protected.
I think we could do that, and I think it'd be legally sufficient. I want to emphasize that that's a board decision. It's not a staff decision. I think staff gets the policy. Staff is obligated to go ahead and move on that policy. The board wants to suspend the effect of that policy, grandfather, whatever you call it, for this limited number of people for this school year. I think they could do that.
Yeah, and I think we need to make sure that we were inclusive, that, I don't know if there are other groups in that same situation. So I don't know how we find that out necessarily. And I'd also like to say that it would only include, I'll say the companies who have been at specific sites for whatever number of years we say. So it wouldn't include expanding it until after this is all settled.
I think we can leave that to the principals. We make the guidelines, and we tell them if you have groups that want to participate or to continue to participate, and they've already reached out to you, then you're welcome to follow just the basic guidelines that we give them of liability insurance. They've participated last year, and they've already contacted you about it again this year. And then they still need to work out the details of that agreement to make sure it matches their building. So I think we just come up with the guidelines. I don't know that we need to research and find out all the organizations and that kind of thing. I don't know
think
that that's necessary.
there would need to be, because the facilities use form was well thought out and legally reviewed previously, and it has all the questions on it that are needed to be answered. I think that form needs to still be filled out in its entirety. And I think we do need to identify all the groups, because basically if there's going to be free rent, I'm sure everybody has a different view of what their contribution to the PTO may be, or whatever the in-kind contribution might be. So I think we still need to know who those are. So
I agree. Have everybody go through the current facility use agreement with a special set of criteria that address the PTA-PTO relationship criteria. Maybe we could just call it that. But I agree. That'd be acceptable, I think. That way it kind of frees them up to go ahead and function under their current agreement, given they have liability insurance.
And then we'll know what policy committee will give them some guidelines, what we need to do with exception or, percentage, what we need to do. It'll give us a better understanding.
Brian, would it be possible for you to craft an agenda item for next week to be able to vote on it?
Sure, if the board would like us.
yeah, I think it needs.
Do we need to vote on getting him to do that?
I don't think we need to vote on that, but
If I just hear direction from consensus or the chair, we'll work on it.
I think we just need to be sure it's inclusive as possible, so we don't have, of whatever the current situations are, so we don't open ourselves up. That's what I'm probably most concerned about, is that there may have been people who wanted to engage in our district, using our facilities for whatever reason, and they just didn't have the familiarity with the PTO process, and so on, and so therefore did not.
You talking about 2 years ago or 3 years ago?
No,
Or
I'm just talking about whenever. It could have been this year even.
if it includes groups that already have an established relationship,
Yeah.
then
That's why I want to make
That's
sure
what-
this, it's
okay.
very tight. Whatever
Gotcha.
these parameters are till the end of the year, that it's very tight until the policy committee comes back with recommendations.
So it does ask Ms. Klutz what are our liability requirements, and it is $1 million,
We asked for a minute.
ask for $1 million liability. Now, we're asking for $1 million liability to handle it through January 1st.
Well, I always
So-
say go with December 31st.
31st, yeah.
The end of the year.
And then they would fill out the facility use agreement, provide liability coverage that they were there, and we would sunset them as far as their, or forgive them and you would put together this, but that way we would have all the information, they would be documented, and it would be up to them to provide proof of insurance, and that would be the only thing. Does
Well,
that
I
kind of
would
lay
like-
out the process, Brian?
Yeah, I would also like to have whatever is believed to be the verbal agreement between the company and the PTA, PTO, and/or the principal, just have that documented as information. Yeah,
I think that's a good idea. I think the organization should submit their understanding of the relationship and let the principal see that to make sure that the principal and the organization are in agreement as to what the practice has been.
Yeah.
So we're not binding ourselves then to something that,
and I believe the agreement
It's not an
would
agreement.
need to be with the principal because the facilities use form is with the principal. The PTO, PTA cannot basically rent our facilities. So the relationship needs to be with the principal.
How many years? We're gonna say 1 year, 2 years?
No, right now, it's just till December 31st of this year.
No,
Until
I
we
mean, how many years
One-
prior?
I would just say 1 year in the
1 year.
past, the last school year.
That they were engaged in the last school year,
Yeah,
the full
let's
last
not make
school
it
year.
complex.
Last year, so they only have to have 1 year history with us then,
Yeah, I guess one full school year.
1 full school year.
what I'm hearing was 1 year history plus have already requested for the 2018-19.
Yeah,
Yeah.
requested.
Yeah, no expansion, just
Right.
wherever they were last year.
Yeah. 1 year plus continuation to this year.
Other than PTOs and PTAs, are there other avenues for for-profits coming into school, doing a program beneficial for the kids? Are there groups that are not associated with PTOs, PTAs, that are allowed to come in and do the same function?
There could be, I don't
So
know.
you-
Are there any
we mean
dance programs or
boosters,
anything?
we mean boosters ban every other variety of PTA, PTO parent organization? Is that what your question is, sir?
I don't know,
Possibly.
is that going to restrict us in what we're trying to do here?
Yes, potential. I think that's why we need to have that research done, that won't all be done in a week, but
I reckon my point is I don't want us just to restrict the PTO, PTAs if there is another organization, another avenue. I mean, I agree with expedience, I agree with, a sunset on January 31. But my concern is what if there is a group we're discriminating against because we don't specifically list them in this agreement umbrella?
yeah, Dr. Kirk, not sunset January 31, December 31.
December 31,
Yeah.
yeah.
And just to make sure I understand, if I was planning to draft it, that the requirement be that it be 1 year participation and have been approved through or set up somehow through the PTO, PTA, and you're saying, what if there's another group?
Or the school?
Like a booster
Or the school.
booster group of some sorts?
And I think, yeah, for staff, if anything comes to mind or in light of this discussion, there is, principals come forward and say, what about these 3 other groups? We need to consider all of that next Monday.
Would it be fair to assume that the principal has agreed to all of these groups?
They should be aware, but may not have agreed.
They'll know.
They won't know?
They won't? Oh, okay.
I'll pull something together and then run it by the administration to make sure that it's feasible, and they'd have a better knowledge of than of what happens at the school, make sure that what I'm putting together makes sense, the way schools are operated. We can have it for next Monday.
Okay. So we'll see what Mr. Shaw can come up with and see what other things are uncovered, because I expect there will be a few more. So.
That's great. I hope there's a bunch of them out there that get to continue participating. I know my kids loved it, and we continue to use them, absolutely. Hope there's a bunch of groups that are benefited and big numbers of kids that are enjoying these programs because of this process.
No,
Thank you.
that's great. I said I'm all for the programs. It's a matter of how do we handle it from an administrative standpoint. So, okay. So we will see what comes up in the...
So the second prong to this, though, is that the policy committee will meet to review this, and that'll be a completely separate but parallel effort to totally redraft this so that December 31st, when that comes and goes, we're on a new process. Or now it's already approved probably by the December business
And I would
session.
suggest if you all have ideas of what could be in such policy updates, to send them to Carolyn and myself, and we'll ensure the policy committee gets those for consideration. So, and then y'all can, as the committee, you can shoot holes in them and see what works or would be reasonable or not reasonable. Okay, any other business in open session?
One question, clarification question, our District 6 meeting, where is that going to be?
Yeah, I think we got that on email. Yeah.
Is there a school? It was still to be determined on my...
No, I think we got I'm thinking I saw it in an email. It's right off of Harris Boulevard, up in the old IBM Drive area.
When did,
I saw it, unless I looked it up online, I don't know. I know I looked to see where it was. I thought we got a link in an email or something. It may have come, yeah, it may be in your, not the focused email, the other one that's more advertisement. So.
Can you send that to me? Oh, come on. I haven't sent, I knew we were having one.
Can I make a motion that we convene in closed session?
Mr. Powell made the motion, Mr. Shoemaker made the second. All in favor of convening in closed session, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's 7-0. We will see you all down the hall. Thank you and good evening.